Okay, so recently I did a video comparing the Gojira plugin components that come on the Quad Cortex with some of the models on the Quad Cortex that are the same amp. In that case, it was based on the 5150 amp. And someone had asked, hey, can you do the same thing for the Plini? And I thought this might be interesting as well, because I've been using the Plini plugin components for a while now and really been enjoying them. But to really take a step back and look at them and decide, what's really new here? Is there anything that's really expanding what the Quad Cortex already does, or is it just kind of a different packaging on similar amps that are already there? So kind of looking up what I know about the Plini plugin and what the amps were modeled after, what I've done here is I've set up a preset, and you can see it here. We've got the 3 amps for the Plini, the clean, the crunch, and the lead. And what I've done is set up some scenes using those, and I've got the Plini cabinet on the back end here. We're using the mono, and then I'm using the Plini reverb. And on the front, we've got the Plini overdrive in case we want to try that out. And then I've got some scene sets up using the different amps, and then a scene with the amp that the Plini amp is modeling after. So you've got the Plini clean, and then its counterpart is the Roland jazz amp. For the crunch, you've got a Freeman. For the lead, you've got a 5150. And I'm using the 5150 blue. But the first thing I want to call your attention to is CPU usage. If you look at this, the Plini amps are using quite a bit of CPU. And I noticed this on the Gojira stuff too. It feels like the plugin components are using way more CPU than their counterparts that come packaged with the Quad Cortex. I mean, the real example is if you look at this, the Plini clean amp is using way more CPU than the Roland is. And when we get to look at it, you'll see the Plini has a little more controls to it, but not a lot. For the crunch, it's about the same. The Freeman amp uses quite a bit of CPU, but as we'll also see, the Freeman amp has way more options of configurability than the Plini amp does. And the Plini amp, the lead, is using a good chunk more CPU than the 5150 amp. So that's one thing I'm noticing as a trend is these plugin components seem to be very CPU heavy. And I wonder, are we really getting extra benefits of that increased CPU usage? Because it is going to cut into your ability to use a preset with multiple amps and multiple cabinets and have multiple effects. At some point you run out of CPU. But let's go into the sound of these amps and compare them and see how much difference we're getting. So if we start with the clean, you can see here the Plini clean is pretty straightforward. You've got a gain, bass, mid, treble, a bright switch, a master, a presence, and then the output. If we compare that to the Roland, you can see here you don't have a gain and master, you just have a single volume. You also don't have a presence. So there are less controls on the Roland than there are on the Plini, but overall pretty similar. And if we listen to how they sound, here's the Plini. We compare that to the Roland. It's pretty similar. The Plini has a little more fullness to it. If we go to an in-between position, I think the Plini is has a little more beef to it. So you can see here, I'm keeping the controls the same on each. So maybe on the Roland, maybe you would push the low and mids a little bit more just to get a little more beef. But I do think the Plini sounds better than the Roland. So there's a little bit of a better tone there, but is it so much better that the cost of the plugin plus the difference in CPU usage is worth it? I'm not sure. You could use two of these Roland Jazz amps, probably run them in stereo and get a really full sound, and it might be able to match it. So I don't know that it's that much better, but let's try it with an overdrive in front of it. So here's the Plini Clean with the overdrive. You can see I've got the drive here on 6, pulling back the tone a little bit and pulling back the level just to keep it under control. Let's try that with the Roland. So you can hear the Plini, you're getting a fuller sound, maybe even a little bit more fidelity, a little more clarity to it. So I think the Plini is definitely better than the Roland, in my opinion. But again, is it that much better? So let's switch over to the Crunch. So for the Plini, you can see you've got pretty straight ahead controls here: gain, bass, mid, treble, a bright switch, a master, a presence, and then the output. The Freeman gives you a good number more controls. You get the voice rather than the treble, but I think they serve basically the same function. And then you got the fat, C45, and the saturation. Those controls don't exist, so I'm just keeping those off. And then the presence and master, and then you've got an output over here. So again, I'm keeping all the controls the same. Let's go ahead and hear how it sounds. So we'll start with the Plini Crunch. And we'll go to the Freeman. So they have a little bit of a different texture to them. I feel like the Plini has maybe a little more presence to it. Let's go ahead and push the presence up just a little bit here. Just a little more treble to it. And instead, just push the treble a little bit. I also feel like the Freeman has a little more gain. But they're pretty close. I mean, they sound slightly different. So the Plini, has been tweaked a little bit, but again, is there really that much difference to it? Of the two, I actually think I prefer the Freeman. It's a little smoother, but they're pretty close. The Plini also has maybe a little more clarity to it. But again, very similar. And I think we saw this on the Gojira plugin as well. The amps weren't that different. There were slight differences to them, but not really huge differences. And the real question is there a sonic enough difference to make the plugin kind of a good value? So let's go ahead and switch over to the lead. So again, this is the 5150 variant. I went with the blue. To my ear, that's kind of what the Plini was sounding like. So one of the things you'll notice is the Plini lead does have some slightly different controls. It has a bright switch, whereas the 5150 has a resonance. So there is some amount of difference here, but I think the tone is pretty close. Again, here's the Plini. And again, like with the Freeman, it feels like the Plini has a little less gain to it, but has a little more top-end clarity to it. And so it feels a little more alive. But again, is it that much of a difference? So let me know what you think. Do you feel like the plugins are really bringing kind of a lot of value and new capabilities to the Quad Cortex? These plugins we have right now, although they sound good, part of me feels like they're not that much better than their counterparts that already exist on the Quad Cortex. It doesn't feel like it's bringing a new amp style or is really improving that much on the amps that it is bringing with the plugin. Obviously, there's things like the overdrive pedals and the different effects that might come with these. And when you start talking about, say, the Rabia one that may be coming, there's a lot of new capabilities in terms of synth. Although you see recently some discussions about maybe there'll be a synth capability coming to the Quad Cortex. And so it really begs the question, are the plugins really bringing anything new to the device? And I don't know how much they are. You know, the amps are slightly different, and in some cases are slightly better, but are they that much different and that much better, considering that you've got to pay extra for the plugin, considering that these plugin components seem to be using a lot more CPU than their counterparts that are already there in the Quad Cortex. So again, let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching.